The sun was already high when Mama Grace returned from the farm with a bundle of firewood balanced carefully on her head. Her faded wrapper clung to her frame, damp with sweat, but her steps were steady. She had walked this path for years, from the little piece of land she rented at the edge of the village back to her mud house with its rusted roof. Each stick she carried would later be sold in the market, and with the little money she made, she could buy garri or beans to feed her only child. Daniel was that child. He had been born in the season when her husband, Emmanuel, fell ill and died after weeks of fever that no herbalist or prayer meeting could cure. Mama Grace had been only 23 when she became a widow. She had wanted to give up on life many times, but whenever she looked into the tiny face of her baby boy, she found strength. Daniel was her reason to live, and from the moment he learned to walk she had sworn that she would sacrifice everything to give him a better life. The villagers often mocked her. Some would say she wasted her strength struggling like a man when she could have remarried. Others claimed she was cursed, for how else could a young widow remain alone all these years? But Mama Grace ignored them. She rose before dawn to fetch water, tilled other people's farms, and carried loads on her back just so her son could go to school. Daniel grew up wearing torn uniforms. But his books were always neat. He would sit under the udala tree at night, reading by the dim glow of a kerosene lantern, while his mother fanned herself and prayed quietly that God would reward their suffering. Daniel was different from the other village boys. Where they chased goats and played draft at the market square, he kept to himself, always with a book in hand. Teachers praised him, saying he was brilliant and had the chance to go far if only his mother could keep paying his fees. Mama Grace took those words like a prophecy. She sold her wrapper and jewelry to sponsor him, and when even that was not enough, she joined women who trekked to the next town to sell vegetables by the roadside. One evening, Daniel returned from school and found his mother sitting outside with blistered hands. He sat by her feet and said, "Mama, I promise you, one day I will build you a house of cement and put you inside. You will never carry firewood again." She touched his head gently and smiled. "My son, all I ask is that you remember me when you are great." The promise stayed with him as he grew older. In secondary school, Daniel won prizes in English and mathematics. His teachers wrote letters to Mama Grace urging her to ensure he furthered his studies. She prayed and wept, for she had no money to pay for university. But God seemed to answer when Daniel sat for the scholarship exam organized by a church foundation in the city. Weeks later, a letter came in a brown envelope. Daniel had won a full scholarship to study accounting at the university. Mama Grace danced around the compound, tears streaming down her face. She rushed to church to give testimony, telling everyone that her son would be the light of their family. When Daniel left for the city, he hugged his mother tightly. "Mama, do not worry," he said. "I will never forget you." Every semester he wrote her letters filled with stories of lecture halls, tall buildings, and city lights. Sometimes he sent a little money from allowances. Mama Grace kept all the letters in a small tin box under her bed, treasuring them like gold. At university, Daniel worked hard. He was brilliant, graduating top of his class. He quickly secured a job in a commercial bank in Lagos, earning more money than anyone in his village had ever seen. The first time he returned home with his new salary, he bought a bag of rice, some clothes for his mother, and a pair of shoes. Mama Grace shed tears of joy, kneeling down to bless him. Neighbors whispered that she had indeed reaped the fruit of her labor, but as the years passed, something began to change in Daniel. Lagos life consumed him. His colleagues dressed in fine suits, drove sleek cars, and spoke polished English. He started copying them, adjusting his accent so he would not sound like a village boy. When people asked about his background, he laughed it off, saying his parents were in another state or abroad. He sent his mother less money, claiming expenses were high. Mama Grace never complained. She believed city life was hard. She was just grateful whenever he called or sent a little gift. She lived for those moments when the villagers would gather around as she showed them the card or shirt her son had sent. They would nod in admiration and say she had indeed trained her son well. Years later, Daniel came home in a shiny car, wearing a wristwatch that sparkled in the sun. Children ran after him shouting his name. The young girls of the village giggled as he passed, admiring his height and neatness. But when he entered his mother's compound, his smile faded. The mud house embarrassed him. The cracked walls, the leaking roof, and the old pots outside seemed beneath him now. He told his mother, "Mama, I will take you to the city soon. You cannot remain in this kind of house." She was overjoyed, thanking God. But he never did. Each time she reminded him, he gave an excuse. Work was stressful. Rent was high, or he was busy. Slowly, visits became rare. He would call briefly during Christmas, promising to return but never showing up. Mama Grace sat alone in her hut, clutching the Bible and praying for her son's safety. She never doubted his love. She never imagined that shame was the reason he stayed away. In Lagos, Daniel's world kept expanding. He joined an upscale church where members wore designer suits and spoke fluent English. He became the toast of his office, admired for his intelligence and charm. Yet whenever someone mentioned family background, he dodged the question. He began to dread the thought of anyone discovering his poor village roots. It was during this time that he met Esther. She was beautiful, with smooth skin and bright eyes. She worked in a multinational company and was the daughter of Chief Michael, a respected businessman who sat in the front pew of the church every Sunday. Esther was kind and soft-spoken, and Daniel was immediately drawn to her. They met during choir practice, exchanged numbers, and began to talk. For the first time in years, Daniel felt alive. He loved how she smiled when he cracked jokes and how she believed in his ambition. Within months they were inseparable, attending church programs together and visiting restaurants on weekends. Soon, love blossomed into talk of marriage. When Esther introduced Daniel to her father, Chief Michael was impressed by his job and neat appearance. But he asked about Daniel's family. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He quickly said his parents lived abroad and were unable to return soon. Chief Michael nodded but pressed no further, though suspicion flickered in his eyes. Daniel left that meeting relieved but also troubled. He knew it was only a matter of time before the truth surfaced. His mother was still in the village, living in a mud house, wearing the same wrapper she had owned for years. How could he introduce such a woman to the wealthy family of his bride? The thought made him sweat at night. Back in the village, Mama Grace heard the news from neighbors. Someone who had traveled to the city said Daniel was dating a big man's daughter and that wedding bells might soon ring. She was so happy she could hardly sleep. She began saving little coins in a tin, dreaming of buying fabric for the wedding. She imagined standing proudly in church, watching her son take a wife. She told the women at the well, "My son will marry soon. By God's grace, I will see my grandchildren." They all congratulated her. She wrote Daniel a letter, asking if the news was true. He did not reply. Weeks passed. Then one evening, a motorbike brought a young man from the city with a message. Daniel had sent word that she should not bother coming for the wedding. He claimed it would be a small ceremony and that he would visit her afterward with his bride. Mama Grace's hands shook as she read the note. Tears filled her eyes, but she folded the paper neatly and kept it with the others in her tin box. That night she prayed earnestly. "Lord, protect my son. Even if he does not want me there, let his marriage be blessed. I forgive him." Daniel's life in Lagos had become a carefully crafted performance. Every morning he dressed in perfectly ironed suits, polished his shoes until they shone, and walked into the bank with the confidence of a man who belonged among the elite. His colleagues admired him, his bosses trusted him, and his neighbors in the estate considered him a respectable bachelor. But behind the confident smile, Daniel lived with the quiet fear of being found out. He never spoke of his village. He avoided questions about his family with smooth excuses. He claimed his parents were missionaries abroad, moving from country to country. Esther never pressed him for details in the beginning. She was in love, and love is often blind to small cracks. She believed Daniel was the man of her dreams. Chief Michael, however, was not so easily deceived. A successful businessman with decades of experience, he had learned to read people. He liked Daniel's ambition, but something about the young man's background seemed hazy. Each time he asked a question, Daniel dodged with a charming smile. Still, Chief Michael decided to give him a chance. Esther was happy, and that was what mattered most. As months passed, Daniel became almost a permanent guest in their mansion. He ate dinners at their long dining table, surrounded by servants. He accompanied the family to church in their convoy of cars. He even began to mentor Esther's younger brother in his studies. The more he blended into their world, the more he feared that one day his real background would be exposed. The pressure mounted when Chief Michael called him aside one evening after dinner. "Daniel, you are asking for my daughter's hand. Before we proceed, I must meet your family. That is our tradition." A man who hides his roots is not trustworthy. Daniel's heart pounded, but he forced a smile. "Of course, sir," he said. "My parents will come soon. They are only delayed by travel." That night he could not sleep. He paced his small apartment, sweating. His mother's face haunted him. He imagined her walking into Chief Michael's mansion in a faded wrapper and old slippers. The thought made him tremble. No, he could not allow it. He decided to fabricate parents. When he shared his plan with his friend Gideon, Gideon was shocked. "Daniel, how can you deny your mother? That woman suffered for you." Daniel snapped. "You do not understand. If they see her, they will look down on me. They will cancel the marriage. I cannot lose Esther." Against Gideon's advice, Daniel went ahead. He approached an elderly couple in his church who had once admired him. With gifts of money and fine words, he persuaded them to act as his parents during the introduction ceremony. They hesitated at first, but his desperation and generosity softened them. The day of the introduction came. Chief Michael's compound was filled with guests, music, and laughter. Esther's family wore matching outfits, and the aroma of jollof rice filled the air. Daniel arrived with the couple he had hired, introducing them proudly as his parents. They wore elegant clothes he had bought for them. Chief Michael welcomed them warmly, though suspicion still lingered in his eyes. The ceremony went smoothly, with kola nuts shared and prayers offered. Esther's family was satisfied, and plans for the wedding began in earnest. Back in the village, Mama Grace heard the news in pieces. Neighbors told her they had seen photos of Daniel's introduction on social media. She smiled, imagining herself in those pictures, though she had not been invited. Deep down, she felt a sting of sadness, but she comforted herself with the thought that her son must have had his reasons. Perhaps he planned to surprise her later. She prayed for him every night, whispering, "Lord, bless my son. Keep his marriage strong." As the wedding approached, the city buzzed with excitement. Daniel and Esther were the talk of the church. The pastor praised them as a shining example of young love. Friends envied their union, and colleagues looked forward to the grand celebration. Daniel walked with pride, but inside, guilt gnawed at him. Mama Grace longed for news. She wrote another letter to Daniel, begging to be allowed to attend. "My son, even if I wear only my old wrapper, let me sit at the back. I only want to see you take your vows." She sent the letter through a trader who traveled to Lagos. When Daniel read the letter, anger flared in him. He tore it into pieces and threw it in the bin. How dare she threaten to show up? She would ruin everything. That night, he called her. "Mama, listen to me carefully. You must not come to the wedding. You will disgrace me. Do you understand?" On the other end of the line, Mama Grace was silent for a long moment. Then her voice broke. "Daniel, I am your mother. Why are you ashamed of me? I carried you for 9 months. I sold firewood so you could go to school. All I ask is to see you marry. Daniel's voice was cold. Mama, if you love me, stay in the village. Do not come. If you come, I will deny you before everyone. Tears streamed down Mama Grace's face as she clutched the phone. After he hung up, she fell on her knees, crying. Yet in her pain, she prayed. God, forgive my son. Open his eyes. Do not let shame destroy him. The weeks raced by, and soon the wedding day was set. Invitations were printed on glossy cards, with golden letters announcing the union of Daniel and Esther. The venue was one of the biggest churches in Lagos, with a reception hall already decorated in white and gold. Caterers prepared mountains of food, musicians rehearsed, and tailors sewed matching outfits for friends of the couple. Daniel basked in the admiration of his colleagues and neighbors. He told himself he had made the right choice. His mother would remain hidden, and his future would shine. Yet at night, when he was alone, guilt pressed on him like a heavy stone. He silenced it with thoughts of Esther's beauty and the wealth her family would bring. Back in the village, Mama Grace tried to accept her son's words. She told herself she would not go. She would sit quietly at home and pray. But as the wedding day drew near, her heart burned. She could not imagine her son standing at the altar while she remained far away. She borrowed a wrapper from a neighbor, polished her old slippers, and told herself she would travel quietly. She would not disturb anyone. She would sit at the back of the church, unseen, and whisper her blessings. On the morning of the wedding, she packed a small nylon bag with her Bible and a bottle of water. She sold her last bundle of firewood to pay for transport. As she boarded a bus heading to Lagos, her heart pounded with both fear and excitement. She prayed all through the journey. Lord, let me see my son happy. Let me not bring shame. In Lagos, the city was alive with celebration. The church was filled with flowers, ribbons, and flashing cameras. Cars lined the street, and guests in colorful outfits streamed in. Esther arrived in a white gown that sparkled under the lights, her father proudly at her side. Daniel stood tall in his suit, smiling confidently, though his heart raced. Mama Grace arrived quietly, her borrowed wrapper neatly tied, her slippers dusty from the journey. She slipped into the church unnoticed, sitting at the back. Her eyes filled with tears as she watched her son standing at the altar, radiant and successful. She whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Even if he does not acknowledge me, I am proud." The ceremony began with songs and prayers. Guests clapped and cheered as the couple exchanged vows. Daniel forced himself to focus, ignoring the gnawing in his chest. Everything seemed perfect, but Mama Grace's heart would not let her stay silent. As the couple prepared to dance, she rose from her seat, clutching her Bible. Slowly, she made her way down the aisle, her eyes fixed on her son. She only wanted to touch his hand, to whisper a blessing. Daniel looked up and froze. His mother stood only a few feet away. Her wrapper faded, her slippers worn, her face lined with years of sacrifice. For a moment, his heart softened. But then he saw the guests turning, whispering. He saw Chief Michael's stern eyes watching. Panic surged through him, and then, in a voice that silenced the hall, Daniel shouted, "Who allowed this woman in here? Ushers, remove her." The church fell into shocked silence. The silence that followed Daniel's outburst was so heavy that even the sound of the ceiling fans seemed loud. All eyes turned toward the frail woman standing in the aisle. Mama Grace froze, her hand still clutching her Bible. She had expected her son might be embarrassed, but she never imagined he would call her out before the entire congregation. The ushers hesitated. They looked from Daniel to the woman and back again. One of them whispered, "But sir, she says she is your mother." Daniel's face tightened. "I said remove her. I do not know this woman. She is an intruder." Gasps filled the church. Esther, standing beside him in her flowing gown, turned sharply. "Daniel, what are you saying? Who is she?" Mama Grace's lips trembled. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Daniel, my son, it is me. It is your mother. I only came to bless you." The hall erupted with murmurs. Guests craned their necks to see better. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. An elderly woman in the front row shook her head slowly. The story of Daniel's poor background had been whispered before, but no one expected the truth to walk boldly into the church in the middle of his wedding. Esther stared at Daniel, her voice sharp. "Daniel, is she telling the truth? Is this your mother?" Daniel's mind raced. He felt the weight of 100 eyes pressing on him, judging. Pride swelled in him like a wall. If he admitted now, everything would collapse. He swallowed hard and shook his head. "No, Esther. She is a beggar. She wants to take advantage of us. I do not know her." Mama Grace staggered as if struck. She clutched the pew beside her to steady herself. Her tears fell freely now, soaking the Bible in her hands. She whispered, "Daniel, my child, how can you say this? I carried you for 9 months. I worked under the sun so you could stand here today." The whispers in the congregation grew louder. Some guests frowned at Daniel. Others exchanged knowing glances. A man near the back stood and called out, "I know this woman. She is Daniel's mother from the village. I have seen her many times." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Guests gasped. The truth was undeniable. Chief Michael rose slowly from his seat, his face dark with anger. He marched toward the altar and stopped in front of Daniel. "Young man," he thundered, "you told us your parents lived abroad. You lied to my family. You dishonored us on this holy day." Esther's mother placed a protective arm around her daughter, her face filled with disgust. "Is this the man you want to marry, Esther? A man who is ashamed of his own mother?" Esther's eyes filled with tears. She turned to Daniel, her voice breaking. "Daniel, tell me it is not true. Tell me you did not hide your mother from me." But Daniel's mouth was dry. No words came. He looked at the floor, trembling. Mama Grace stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "Forgive my son. He has forgotten himself. Do not punish him for my poverty. I only came to pray for him." But her words could not heal the damage. The congregation was already buzzing with anger and disappointment. Chief Michael turned to the pastor. "This marriage cannot go on. I will not give my daughter to a liar." The pastor shifted uncomfortably. He looked at Daniel, then at Mama Grace, then at Esther's family. With a heavy sigh, he closed the Bible in his hand. "The wedding is hereby suspended until this matter is resolved." The announcement hit Daniel like a blow. His knees went weak. Guests began to leave, murmuring. Some shook their heads, others whispered that he had brought shame upon himself. The musicians quietly packed their instruments. The caterers stopped serving food. Plates of jollof rice sat untouched as the reception collapsed before it even began. Esther pulled off her veil, tears running down her cheeks. She looked at Daniel one last time, then turned and walked away with her parents. Daniel reached out. "Esther, please, wait." But she did not look back. Mama Grace tried to move closer, but Daniel pushed her hand away. "This is your fault," he hissed. "Why did you come? You have ruined me." Her heart broke at his words. She sank to the floor, sobbing, while the ushers and a few sympathetic women gathered to lift her. One of them scolded Daniel openly. "Shame on you. You deny your own mother. Is this the woman who carried firewood for you? Who sent you to school?" The humiliation was unbearable. Daniel fled from the church, his suit damp with sweat. He stumbled into the empty street outside, his chest heaving. His world was crumbling. In one moment, he had lost his bride, his reputation, and the respect of everyone who once admired him. Back inside the church, Mama Grace wiped her tears and rose slowly. She refused to curse her son. Instead, She lifted her trembling hands and prayed aloud. Lord, forgive my child. Open his eyes. Let him not destroy himself because of shame. She turned and walked out of the church, her slippers scraping against the floor. News spread quickly. By evening, social media buzzed with videos from the wedding. Clips of Daniel shouting at his mother circulated widely. Comments poured in, "A man who denies his mother is a man without honor. Esther escaped disgrace. Chief Michael's family made the right choice." At the bank where Daniel worked, whispers began. Colleagues shared the video in secret WhatsApp groups. His boss called him in and asked pointedly, "Daniel, is this true?" Daniel could only bow his head in shame. At home that night, Daniel sat alone in his apartment. The silence was deafening. He stared at his reflection in the mirror and hardly recognized himself. His mind replayed the scene in the church over and over. His mother's tears. Esther's shocked face. Chief Michael's anger. He pressed his hands against his head and groaned. He wanted to call his mother, but pride held him back. He wanted to call Esther, but he knew she would not answer. He sat there until dawn, broken. In the village, Mama Grace returned quietly. She had no energy left to explain to curious neighbors. She locked herself in her hut and prayed for her son. Her heart ached, but she still loved him deeply. She whispered, "One day he will remember who he is. One day he will come home," but Daniel's life was already unraveling. The shame of that day followed him everywhere. The friends who once admired him avoided his calls. Church members who had praised him refused to greet him. At work, his career stalled. Promotions passed him by, and whispers shadowed him in every meeting. The day he walked into his office and overheard two junior staff mocking him, his heart sank. They laughed, saying, "That is the man who denied his mother at the altar. How can anyone trust him?" He rushed into the restroom, locked the door, and wept like a child. Daniel had everything and lost it in one moment. And he knew deep inside that it was not fate or enemies. It was his own choice. The weeks after the ruined wedding stretched into months, and Daniel's world continued to shrink. The shame clung to him like a shadow. Whenever he walked through the city, he felt eyes following him. Sometimes strangers whispered, pointing. Other times, it was just in his mind, but it was enough to make him restless. At work, his manager called him into the office one afternoon. "Daniel, the board has been discussing your case. Clients have expressed concern. Your name has been dragged through the mud. We cannot afford to risk our reputation. You are hereby suspended until further notice." The words cut deep. Daniel staggered out of the office. His salary stopped, his allowances ended, and his once bright future dimmed in an instant. Bills piled up. Rent notices came. His friends, who once drank with him in expensive lounges, stopped picking his calls. Even his close colleague Gideon avoided him. One by one, the people who celebrated him disappeared. Alone in his apartment one night, Daniel sat in the dark with his head in his hands. Hunger gnawed at his belly, but he had no money for food. His wedding suit, still hanging in the corner, mocked him. He remembered his mother's face, the tears that glistened in her eyes as he pushed her away. Her voice echoed in his mind, "Daniel, my child, how can you say this?" He tried to bury the memory, but it haunted him. He tossed and turned in bed, waking from nightmares where his mother reached for him but he could not move. In the dreams, Esther stood with her back to him, walking away no matter how loud he called her name. Meanwhile in the village, Mama Grace lived quietly. She returned to her farm, bent with age, carrying baskets of cassava and firewood. The neighbors pitied her, whispering that her son had disgraced her. But she never spoke ill of Daniel. Every evening she knelt by her bedside, praying, "Lord, have mercy on my child. Bring him back to you, and back to me." Back in the city, Daniel's situation worsened. After 3 months of suspension, he received a letter of termination. Without a job, his landlord grew impatient. When Daniel failed to pay his rent for 2 months, the landlord threw his belongings into the street. Daniel begged, but the man refused. A neighbor muttered, "You are the one who denied your mother. Now see where it has brought you, homeless." Daniel wandered from one friend to another. But no one wanted to take him in. His name was Poison. He slept in bus stations, under bridges, and sometimes in church pews. The young banker who once wore expensive suits was now reduced to torn clothes and hunger. One evening, Daniel stumbled into a small church where revival was taking place. The preacher's voice boomed through the loudspeakers. "Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long. A man who despises his parents despises the blessing of God." Daniel froze. The words pierced him like a sword. He fell to his knees at the back of the church, tears streaming down his face. He wept uncontrollably, drawing the attention of ushers who tried to comfort him. But the weight of his guilt was too heavy. He remembered every moment, his mother's trembling voice, Esther's tears, the disappointment of Chief Michael, the pastor closing the Bible. That night, Daniel could not sleep. For the first time, he admitted the truth to himself. He had destroyed his own life, not because of poverty or enemies, but because of pride and shame. The next morning, he boarded a bus heading to the village. His clothes were wrinkled, his shoes worn out, and he carried nothing but a small nylon bag with the little he had left. As the bus rolled along the dusty road, memories of his childhood flashed in his mind, his mother carrying him on her back, feeding him with the little she had, praying over him at night. Guilt tore at his heart. When he arrived in the village, children pointed at him. Some recognized him from the viral wedding video. They whispered, "See him. The one who denied his mother." His face burned with shame as he walked through the familiar paths. He reached the small mud house at the edge of the village. The door was open, and smoke curled from the kitchen fire. Inside, Mama Grace sat on a low stool, peeling yam. Her back was bent, her wrapper faded, but her spirit was alive. She lifted her head as Daniel entered. For a moment, neither spoke. Tears filled Daniel's eyes. He fell on his knees before her. "Mama, forgive me. I have sinned against God and against you." Mama Grace's hands trembled. She dropped the knife and rushed to him. "My son." She pulled him into her frail arms. "I have waited for this day. I never stopped praying for you." Daniel wept bitterly, his tears soaking her wrapper. Mama Grace stroked his hair gently. "I forgive you, Daniel. You are my son." A mother does not throw away her child. The neighbors who had gathered outside peeked in, whispering. Some nodded, touched by the reunion. Others murmured that Daniel had finally learned his lesson. For the next few weeks, Daniel stayed with his mother in the village. He worked on the farm beside her, carrying firewood, fetching water, and helping her weed the cassava fields. Each day he grew thinner, but his heart felt lighter. He began to pray with her every evening, kneeling by the small kerosene lamp. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Daniel asked his mother, "Mama, do you think God can give me another chance?" Mama Grace smiled faintly. "My son, as long as there is breath in your body, there is hope. You lost everything because of pride, but if you humble yourself, God will lift you again." Encouraged by her words, Daniel decided to return to the city, not to chase wealth, but to start anew. He found small work as a bus conductor, shouting routes and collecting fares. The job was hard and humiliating, but he endured. He sent part of his small earnings to his mother in the village, determined to care for her. Months passed. Slowly, Daniel rebuilt his life. He found a job as a clerk in a small farm, then later as an assistant in a logistics company. The salary was modest, but he lived humbly. He no longer boasted, no longer hid his past. When people asked, he told them openly, "I once denied my mother, and I lost everything. Learn from me." His story spread. Not as shame, but as a lesson. Young men in churches were warned, do not be like Daniel who denied his mother. Pastors used his name as a cautionary tale. Years later, Daniel returned to the village with savings. He built a small bungalow for Mama Grace, painted white with a zinc roof. She wept as she stepped inside, lifting her hands in praise. Daniel knelt before her again. Mama, this is your home. Forgive me for every tear I caused you. Mama Grace laid her hands on his head and prayed, Lord, bless my son. Restore him fully. Let his children never know shame. Though Daniel never regained the high position he once had, he lived with peace in his heart. He learned that true wealth was not in titles or mansions, but in humility, love, and honoring the woman who gave him life. As for Esther, she married a man chosen by her parents, but she often heard of Daniel's story. Whenever she saw his name, she remembered the day at the altar and whispered a prayer for him, and so the tale of Daniel, the man who denied his mother, lived on in the village and the city alike, a warning to the proud, and a reminder that a mother's love and prayers never die. A man who abandons his parents abandons his foundation. No matter how high he rises, he will fall if he forgets those who carried him through the storm. Honor your parents, not because they are perfect, but because they are God's gift to you.